unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello everyone and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty brought to you in partnership with MyPillow.
America is not having enough babies to keep our populations up. So we need immigrants that have been vetted to do work.
Yeah, it's becoming a Democratic talking point, but why? We'll have more on that later. But first,
the more regulation we have on people's ability to speak with their dollars to candidates, the worse off we get. And the more regulation we get, the more things can be manipulated.
All right, 21 days to go, just 3 weeks, and the media is in a frenzy to make sure Kamala wins. Here to talk about it today is Federal Elections Commissioner Trey Traynor in his private capacity. I'm your host, Gary Michael Voris, here in Houston. Trey, thanks very much for coming on. So let's talk about what 60 Minutes did in that editing job of the Kamala interview and what ABC did in fact-checking Trump, but not Kamala. Let's not forget what CBS News did in the Veep debate, cutting off J.D. Vance's mic as he was correcting the moderators and their phony information and fact-checking against him. A lot of people are sitting out here going, isn't that election interference and therefore an in-kind contribution? Hear that like tossed around all over social media. So first, what is an in-kind contribution?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me again, Gary. An in-kind contribution is when somebody gives something of value without actually physically giving money. They give something of value to a candidate. And here people are claiming that the use of the public airwaves and the media involvement would be an in-kind contribution to one particular candidate. I tend to disagree with that. I mean, I'm a strong believer in the First Amendment, and I believe that the media has a right to present whatever it is that they want to present, however it is they want to present it. And I think that the best answer, the best response to all of that is more programming out there. So while it's shameful what has happened with what we've seen, it's also perfectly protected activity under the First Amendment and something that I think we're going to continue to see in this election cycle.
So, okay, let me ask you this then, because, I'm going to speak on behalf of the folks that I, follow, and they follow me on Twitter or X and all of that and everything. And they're kind of losing their minds over this. And certainly as a journalist, 40 years or so in the trade, I'm like flabbergasted that they do this. Yeah, I'd say that they do it. I'm not as surprised that things have sort of traveled down the road far enough now that this has just sort of become accepted practice, maybe not policy, maybe policy, but certainly practice. That the movement has happened since my first days in news. My first job was at CBS News in New York, and I was working on 60 Minutes and Campaign 84 between Reagan and Mondale and that whole thing. To think how far this has traveled in these 40 years is a little bit shocking. But beyond that, the idea they think they can just do all of this and there's no consequences for their actions. I mean, that's a little mind-blowing.
Well, I mean, I think the consequence to their action is that the American public sees right through it and just completely disregards everything that they say. But remember, it's baked into the history of our country that the media has always been political. I mean, you look back at the early days of the founding. I mean, Thomas Jefferson founded his own newspaper once he left the Washington administration. Alexander Hamilton had his own newspaper to fight against Aaron Burr's becoming vice president of the United States. I mean, those are things that happen. You look at the late 1930s, early 1940s. Nobody knew that the president of the United States at that time was in a wheelchair because the media censored information related to the fact that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. So it's always been part of the makeup of the media that they attempt to manipulate the public and present what they think to be the best options. And again, I think the response to that is, I think what you do here is fantastic. I think that this type of programming is necessary to counter all of that because you have to have the truth being put out. And I think that man naturally inclines towards the truth. We're created that way. And so once the truth is presented, I think that the American people will see that and latch onto it. It's just a matter of making sure that the voice is out there to be presented. Now, the bigger question becomes, do we need to give the type of breaks that are given to media corporations, those type of things? Those are policy decisions that need to be made in response to these. But do they have an absolute right to edit their stuff and present the candidates in the way that they think best possible? Yes, just like you and I do. Me talking to my neighbor, I have that option available to me, and I'm going to exercise it, and I hope everyone does.
All right, so we're going to step away for a second here, but when we come back, we, touched on it a little bit. We want to go deeper into it. How far should media lies, their lies, be allowed to go, again, before they have to sort of pay the price for it somehow? We'll tackle that right after this break. The establishment has tried to assassinate President Trump twice, but we can't really be shocked that those who slaughter 1 million unborn babies each year would try to kill one more human being who stands in the way of their diabolical agenda. Trump, like every one of us, including all of us at Souls and Liberty, is a sinner. But like all of us, he is in the fight and fighting for all of us to get one more chance, maybe a last chance, to save the republic. We must hang together, or as Benjamin Franklin said, we shall hang separately. And maybe far sooner than many imagine, because communists take over and always persecute Christians and Catholics in particular. Let us help you fight these forces of evil. Become a monthly supporter today so we can continue giving you the information, the tools of our faith, and the support network you need to go out and save souls and save our nation. Join our merry band of happy warriors and click below to get into the fight. We need you, we need each other. Join the resistance. Become a monthly donor today. All right, welcome back. Trey, you have what some are going to consider sort of a surprising take on this sort of barrage of media lies and the whole First Amendment issue. Should media be allowed to just say whatever media wants to say because of First Amendment? Is that kind of the position?
Well, it's my position, and it's my position because there's no way to regulate what is going on. We do not want the government reaching in and telling people what they can and cannot say on the public airwaves. If they can do that to ABC, NBC, CBS, they can do it to Souls and Liberty. And we absolutely don't want to have that happen. So it's a very slippery slope when we start to exercise that type of editorial oversight from government entities coming in to regulate. So, listen, I think it's absolutely shameful what has happened. And, it needs to be called out and it needs to be pointed out. And it's great that we've had people come out and say, hey, they edited this document. They edited this tape. They edited this interview. They gave her the questions beforehand, all of those type of things that we've seen happen in the past. Mm-hmm. And the truth ultimately prevails. And comes out. And I have full faith and confidence in the American people to find ways to get the truthful message out.
Do you think there's a kind of a tipping point, I suppose, that the public might reach with the media? It's the only job profession that isn't paid for by the government. It's the only job profession mentioned in the Constitution. It's placed that highly that we need to have a free press and all that to monitor the government and everything else. But don't you just reach some point of abuse where there should be something to be able to say, nope, you're not allowed to, go out there and openly politic for somebody. Like maybe, I don't know, you're not allowed to make a campaign contribution if you're in the media without disclosing that you've made a campaign contribution to somebody. Would that be kind of an okay thing?
Well, no, I don't think so. The more regulation we have on people's ability to speak with their dollars to candidates, the worse off we get, and the more regulation we get, the more things can be manipulated. I think that the appropriate response of the American people to this type of disservice that's being done is for them to turn it off. Stop watching ABC and NBC and CBS and CNN and all of those places. If you have a problem with the information that's being presented, turn it off. Because I'll tell you the one thing that all of these major media outlets are responsive to is when they don't have cable boxes turned on and they can't sell advertisement space based upon that, they will react to it. And that is how the American people ultimately right now have all of the control that they need over the system to correct all of the inaccuracies that are there. The way they do that is to turn it off, which cuts into the ad revenue of every one of these major media outlets.
Yeah, we've seen, and again, I've been in this for 40 years. I have never seen mass layoffs at all of the big names. I mean, it's been a big story for quite a while. What's happening in local media, local newspapers in particular, and small town, this, that, and the other, that are now being bought up, radio stations and things, by George Soros, of all people. Here we go again. Mm-hmm. But the layoffs at like CNN and they're not just one, they're like rounds of layoffs that keep happening, and yet they still don't seem to learn their lesson. It's kind of like, hey, dudes, anybody home? Knock, knock.
Well, that's exactly right. And they're not going to learn the lesson until the American people hold them accountable. And I'm not a big believer in boycotts of various, stores and places like that. But it's very, very easy to boycott media outlets that you don't trust. For example, I think that former President Trump has done an excellent job of boycotting media outlets that he does not trust to put out his information. He won't do interviews with them. He won't have debates on certain channels and those type of things. And I think that's fully appropriate for him to do. And I think it sends the message. And I think the American people are starting to get that. And hopefully what we'll see going forward is that individuals will start to exercise that right.
Yeah, well, amen to that. Amen. And yeah, I agree. I think he's doing the right sort of political thing as well as ethical thing. Why would you go into somebody's house so you know they're trying to assassinate you? I mean, it's crazy. All right, we're going to step away for a moment, shift gears a little bit when we come back and talk about the Catholic vote and Donald Trump. We'll get a little preview. It's going to be more Pepto-Bismol for Team Harris. We'll be right back.
Go to MyPillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size MyPillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
No matter who wins in November, we have to embrace that we are living in a post-Christendom culture. And the heart of that is a rejection of the gospel. As one item on our agenda to combat this, Souls and Liberty is hosting our first annual retreat at sea. You might be familiar with the annual event we produced for over 10 years at Church Militant. Dr. Jules Gomez, our Rome correspondent, and I are going to be doing the presenting, and the theme is Christians in Exile Triumphing in Adversity, which provides a whole range of discussions to think about. Now, we sail out of Galveston, Texas to the Western Caribbean November 10th to the 17th, yes, right after the election. I think all of us are probably going to need it one way or the other. Please join us for serious discussion, spiritual preparation, and bonding, very important, bonding with fellow Catholics. Registration information is provided below and on our site at soulsandliberty.com/retreat-at-sea 2024. So sign up and we hope to see you there. All right, welcome back, everybody. Trey, very recent polling of Catholic voters, especially in Midwestern battleground states, it's causing a great deal of consternation for Harris and her buddies at Communist Democratic headquarters. I mean, these are not good numbers when it comes to Catholic votes, and they're mirroring kind of what's happening to her campaign overall.
Well, they absolutely are. And when you talk about the margins in this election being so close, where everything is within the margin of error in every poll that you see, a shift of 10, 15, 20,000 voters here or there makes or breaks not only the election in a particular state, but makes or breaks the election in the Electoral College. Mm-hmm. And so to say that Catholics are shifting more towards President Trump and away from Vice President Harris is a significant development. I mean, it's one that we've talked about here before about the importance of the Catholic vote. And while in those Midwestern states, they make up about the same proportion of the population as they do around the country, there they actually have a tendency to be higher voter participants than they do in other parts of the country. They're more patriotic and politically attuned to showing up to the polls. And I think that's what's important for Catholics to do, is to show up to the polls and express themselves. And in those states, they're doing that. And they're showing that shift towards President Trump and away from Kamala Harris. I mean, I think the shift that I last read in Wisconsin is as much as 19 percentage point shift there, and a 3 or 4 percentage point shift in Pennsylvania. And I know you've talked about this extensively here on the program, but those two states are key to somebody winning the Electoral College. And in fact, I think if President Trump wins one or both of those, I think it's game over if he just maintains everything else that he got in 2020. Joe Biden did lip service to being a Catholic. I'm a Catholic, I don't really go for the abortion stuff and, those type of things. He runs as Scranton Joe, and that plays with some folks.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, Kamala Harris just doesn't have that same bent and doesn't have the ability to convince Catholics that she's going to even remotely resemble what they believe in.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Right now, when you compare how Trump ran with the Catholic vote against Hillary, he had a little sort of leg up, 1.5 to 2 points, kind of depends on how they were, framing the numbers and all of that. But it was a plus little bit. Right now, he's running further ahead with the Catholic vote than he was with Hillary. And again, those blue wall states, ultimately it was the Catholic vote in those blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that handed him the election. The Catholic vote in the 3 very important states was sort of sealed the deal for him. And here we are again looking like, hey, is history going to repeat itself? Because certainly in the Catholic numbers, it sure looks like that.
Well, as I've said all along in this election, I think the way that the Catholic vote goes is ultimately how the presidency is decided. And so I think it is critical for Catholics to show up at the polls and express themselves. And now I'll get on my soapbox here and say that I think it's important for them to be faithful to the teachings of the church with regard to how they exercise their citizenship. And looking at who they decide to support, I think is very important. But I think that's being reflected right now in what you just explained in the polling. I think that they've made that decision. As I've talked about before, I mean, the Democrats have done nothing but try to nationalize this election around abortion. And if you do that, you have to know that you're going to lose the Catholic vote, or the majority of the Catholic vote, in doing that, because of the church's strong, correct stance on abortion. And Catholics who are faithful should show up and support the church's position.
Yep, that's well said. Well said. All right, Trey, thank you as usual. Excellent insights and discussion every single time. Folks, this is one of those guys my mom used to reference and say, what he doesn't know isn't worth knowing. That's Trey Trainer. And for the record, in case anybody wants to try to do something crazy and say blah, 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 and take a soundbite out of here and no, look, blah, 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 all of Trey's comments and his opinions and insights he's offering are in his capacity as a private citizen and a Catholic, exercising his own First Amendment rights to free speech, and not in his role as a member of the Federal Election Commission. Trey, thanks very much again.
Thanks, Gary.
All right, it's starting to become a familiar refrain from child-killing communist Democrats. Here's Bill Clinton pounding the drum yesterday out on the stump for Kamala in Georgia.
You had a case in Georgia not very long ago, didn't you? They made an ad about it, about a young woman who'd been killed by an immigrant. Yeah, well, if they'd all been properly vetted, that probably wouldn't have happened. But if they're all properly vetted, and that doesn't happen, and America is not having enough babies to keep our populations up, so we need immigrants that have been vetted to do work, there wouldn't be a problem. And he couldn't keep people all torn up and upset.
All right, aside from the fact that there is one less American owing to the abortion Monica Lewinsky said she got, This latest talking point that there are not enough babies being born in America and therefore immigrants need to be brought in to replace the shrinking native-born population, well, that's quite the charge. It is the policies of these same communist Democrats that created the shrinking population problem to begin with. Their incessant pushing of contraception, $500 million a year to Planned Parenthood of your tax dollars, as well as abortion up to the moment of birth. How did they think all that was going to end? Like an increasing population? He's right, Clinton, there is a shrinking of the native-born population, but what he, as well as Chuck Schumer and all the rest of them, never say is that they are the ones who've caused it. And now, conveniently, at last, wow, they've come up with the solution for the problem that they created. Let's just bring in truckloads and plane loads of tens of millions of illegal immigrants and just make them citizens. During the era of Roe from 1973 until 2022, approximately 65 million Americans were slaughtered in the womb. 65 million. Had they been allowed to be born, this conversation wouldn't be happening. Additionally, it's estimated that the ready supply of contraception has caused tens of millions of more abortions of the non-surgical type, as well as prevented the births of many tens and tens of millions more babies over those 50 years and counting. Add all of this up, and we're talking well in excess of 100 million Americans not walking around today. They would have all been born or conceived and then born at a steady annual clip, not just suddenly being dumped into the population all at once. So the U.S. population over the past half century would have increased at somewhere between 1 to 3 million people each year over and above what it was doing and now declining. But no, in order to help destroy the moral fiber of the country, to weaken families and make individuals more dependent on government, communists pushed the absurd notion of consequence-free sex. They did it for power, but as with everything communist, it's a lie. There is no such thing as consequence-free sex, neither individually, nor, as they are now having to admit publicly, and actually have the gall to campaign on, as a nation either. It's a sad statement watching these decrepit men like Schumer and Clinton hobble about campaign stages and offer phony solutions to problems they created once again so they could maintain their power for a communist agenda. Hopefully they don't, but it sure looks like they will go to their graves and proceed to their judgments with hands thoroughly soaked in blood, the blood of children, as well as the demise of a nation to boot. God love you. I'm Gary Michael Voris.